What's going on, guys, and welcome back. So Dimension Force is coming out, and there's a few things that are kind of going to be a little relevant from the set, that being like Dynamorphia, the Therions archetype, and kind of how just Therions work with other archetypes more or less than they actually do on their own. So we're going to bring a competitive tier list for you guys post Dimension Force. If your deck is not on here, I do apologize, we cannot fit all of them, but that likely means they're a rogue deck. If you feel like we left them out, let us know down in the comments below what decks they are. I had a couple images that apparently did not show up here. Shadal's, like branded Shadal without Invoked, without any of the other stuff, was going to end up in rogue. And shout out Jameson, Unchained also was going to be in rogue. For some reason the images did not want to upload, and I'm just now seeing that, so they are both in rogue. And speaking of rogue, ABC, not only can ABC play the branded stuff, because they do tend to go into ABC Dragon Buster, which is a fusion monster. A lot of their combo lines did and do require links, but there are ways to incorporate the branded package that just helps out to a degree and can help give them other play lines. But more importantly, I wanted to talk about ABC because Therion King Regulus is a machine, and we all know what that means. Yes, machine support, machine negate. Not only that, ABC, if they can get like A, B, especially B, C in the graveyard, and then Regulus can special summon itself and equip that one, normal summon another piece or another machine, another monster. Then you can go into a link play and Regulus can really just abuse your pieces that way, especially like if you open the field spell and search it, because then the field spell on your opponent's turn likely will fetch you back the Regulus, or on your turn again, because it's when any monster is destroyed by battle. So your turn, opponent's turn, either or, your monster, their monster, it can add back. Gives a little bit of protection, does a whole lot. Emancipator, again, I think this is going to be a rogue deck. There's better combo decks, and the deck can be prone to bricking or just really hoping that first mill not only doesn't get negated, but also like it has to hit something good, and if it doesn't, there's just times where the deck just straight up dies to itself. Ignister, we're going to keep the rogue train going strong. Ignisters, they can fit a bunch of hand traps. They put out a big towers. They're a lot of one card starters. They do lack representation, but they are probably one of the better rogue decks of the format. Fourth time's the charm. Altergeist, let's keep it going. First trap deck on here. Yeah, Altergeist, I'm going to leave them at rogue. I think there's a lot that you can do with the deck, and I just don't think people are really playing it. Whether trap decks aren't super popular, and if they are, it's usually like more Eldlich or other trap decks. So I just think Altergeist kind of falls by the wayside by default. So in the past, this had represented Based. That is no longer the case because Based kind of isn't really a deck anymore. It is now SAD, Synchro Adventure DPE. Basically Based with just the engine slightly shifting. It's a little more synchro focused, less on the artifact. Yeah, that's kind of just SAD, Based. Same deck, just a newer version of it. It's definitely tier 1. Like, this deck is really strong. It abuses all the power engines in the game that it can, and it just works so good, and it makes it harder to stop because they just play all these different engines. Another machine deck, Cyber Dragon. Really tempted to put them up here, but I just can't. I'm gonna put them down at the rogue. Therions are gonna help them. I really like what it offers. Branded Cyber Dragon, I think there's a lot of potential, but for a tier list, it's not just how good is the deck, it's how much representation does it have, how well is it doing at events, all these things kind of combining. And while I love Cyber Dragons and there's absolutely nothing wrong with it, the majority of Cyber Dragon base is more of a casual, or they want to stick to a more pure and OTK type focus build, and really those builds are absolutely rogue. You're not going to see a ton of success with them, and they are going to be harder to pilot with success. Not to say it can't be done, but the majority of Cyber Dragon decks, I think, definitely fall in that rogue category. But there's a handful of people with builds where I would absolutely not be surprised to see them top an event. So Cyberse Eldlich now. Cyberse gadget representing the Cyberse Eldlich, because I did want to split up Eldlich and Cyberse Eldlich. So I'm going to put them as our first 1.5 deck. I think they cover the back row, trap, and also the combo portion with Cyberse really well, and I like what the deck can do on both fronts, going first, a little bit going second as well. DD, deck that really needs a good pilot to do much. They've had a handful of tops the last couple formats. They've seen success. The deck's is very hard to pilot, and there's not many people that are piloting it, because for the effort you have to put into it, I think that there's just better decks overall, and I think that's kind of the consensus and what most people are saying. Best deck of the format, probably Despia, whether it's with Brave, whether it's without, whether you're playing like the Frightfur and Patchwork engine. And I've seen Allure of Darkness and a little higher Despia counts too, especially because Tragedy getting banished off your Allure is just free plussing all day. Despia is insane. Despia is crazy. Despia is the best tier 1 deck of the format, but it's pretty close, and I think that we're in a decent place right now. The only thing I'd say is it's kind of annoying, if you will, to see how splashed Brave is. When we were doing our top 8 breakdowns, like the Brave engine was in over 70% of topping decks and like 80+% of winning decks, and that's just, to me, it's not a very fun format. DPE had been seeing decline. It was actually in the upper 40s as far as being played in top 8 deck lists, whereas the previous format it was in the 60s, so it is a pretty good drop off there. And a lot of people, especially like Despia builds, were realizing that adding 2 good cards for 2 bad cards in a deck that's locked into fusion summoning might not be the best idea. There are exceptions to every rule, but a general rule of thumb was it just was not worth it. Dinosaurs. Where are we going to put our dinos? Rogue. There's a lot of rogue decks. Like I said, we can't mention everything, but I did want to mention some of the better rogue strategies. You know, Dinosaur, again, you can play them with these other engines. Like you could splash in Branded, whether you're going off of Verde, whether you're going off of like opening or fusion, like ways to not conflict with your normal summon, because dinos really don't need their extra deck. They don't need to go into like Dolko. They don't need to go into Link monsters. They can play around that, and you can actually, like Branded Fusion, send the Overtex and to make your Lubellion with Albaz, and then discard, and now your Overtex is also going to search out your Evolution Pill, and you can just get your plays rolling that way and play in a kind of neat play style. I am working on a list at the moment. We mentioned the new support helping out Dynamorphia. Until they do something, they're rogue. I don't like jumping the gun on decks and putting them up higher. Until they do something, they are rogue. Dragon Link. This is a deck that, again, can play the Adventurer package, but does not need to. And I think it's just a very strong deck overall. Not where it was at one point in time. They've taken their lumps on the ban list. But nonetheless, I think Dragon Link is still a pretty strong tier 2 strategy. Likewise, Drytron taking their hits on the ban list, and they keep on pushing through. Another tier 2 deck because, well, not only do you see the deck, not only has it been popping up and topping a little bit more as of late, the deck's still just crazy strong. It's pretty consistent, and like the combos it can pull off when it goes off are just insane. It's kind of comes down to the representation's not quite there to move them up higher, but if more like higher level players said, hey, I want to play Drytron, I could absolutely see it being a tier 1 deck. Earth Machine, they've won at least 2 regionals now, and they have a handful of other top 8s. This deck is gaining a lot of steam, and guess what? It's another machine deck. King Regulus can come in here and give them a negate early, kind of help them protect their combo, protect them choke points, and just give that other play line, help them go first a little bit. But the deck can like go second really well. The deck has so many consistent starters. The deck can grind really well, and I think with King Regulus, I wouldn't be surprised to put this as a strong tier 1.5 deck. Trap Eldlich, Branded Eldlich, I think they are both a little behind the Cyberse Eldlich, so I'm going to put them down at tier 2. A lot of the time, like Trap Eldlich, I feel like you kind of steal wins with your floodgates, and then games 2 and 3 are definitely going to be harder. But if you go to an event with Trap Eldlich and you're halfway competent, you're probably going to do decent and make a run at getting your invite, because the floodgates are just so strong that you don't really have to play great. You just don't have to mess up badly, and then you're gonna have a pretty good day. I had played someone at the last regional I went to, and I was under skill drain and um, rivalry goes in. Skill drain goes in all 3 games, and game 3 I actually could have won because I had Albaz in my hand for 1800, and I could have normal summoned it and attacked because he had 1300, but I forgot to write down the 1000 from his skill drain, so I had him at 23 on my notebook, and I had a plan, and I was like, okay, I can do this, and I just gotta get through the turn and I'll win. But had I wrote that 1000 down, I could have just normal Albaz and won. And he was actually at like table 20 in round 8 then later, and it just kind of was a big feels bad moment because those floodgates put in work all day long. Like, he just opened them insane against me, and it came down to me not paying attention enough in writing and keeping good enough not note keeping, but keeping tabs on life points, and just a big error on my part, and which actually would have turned my day and started it much better. But anyway, it happens, guys, and we moved on from that. Almost won our Dark Magician Girl playmat. I was actually bummed out losing in the finals, but Fusion Mash deck list is up on the channel, replay video on the channel, working on our updated list because we played without Alubers. We just didn't have them at the time, but now we do have our Alubers, our opening, our other better cards to get into that branded engine. Evil Twins. Splite's not quite here yet. I think it'll give the deck a little bit of a boost, and maybe we'll see it creep into tier 2. But for now, and in this current format with Dimension Force, I think that Evil Twins are still a pretty decent rogue deck. I've seen people topping regionals here and there. The deck pops up, the deck is kind of there, and it's decent. And just with Splite on the horizon, I think it is worth mentioning and throwing them in here as that rogue strategy. Floowandereeze, probably one of the better 1.5 decks. I don't quite think they're tier 1. They're like just behind the tier 1 decks, but they are really close. Like, this deck is scary to go against. And I don't know if they're going to really hit it on the ban list. I don't know how you would necessarily hit it, because it may just be one of those like format dependent decks. It's definitely more consistent, especially with the new quick play spell, but like, it just gave them a way to play through Imperm, or I should say around Imperm, or through other hand traps. But I think Flounderies is a really strong 1.5 deck. Infernobles, I know that they came really close to a top 8 down in one of the Texas regionals, I believe. Rich, someone I've talked to from the Cyber Dragon group, was playing it, took 11th place out of like a 500 person regional. The deck is pretty strong. Deck has its combo lines, but like Adamantipator, I just think there's better combo decks to be playing, and that reason alone is going to put it in our rogue strategies. Invoked now. I still don't know why more people aren't on Invoked branded. I tested it a little bit. Maybe I'll put that deck list up if you guys want to see it. But I think the deck's actually really kind of crazy. But like Invoked Dogmatica, Invoked Dogmatic DPE, Invoked Shadal, whatever we're putting this as, Invoked, I got them as a good tier 2 deck. They're still really strong. The hands of the right pilot, like, you can see people doing well with this deck. I just don't think many people are playing it because I think a lot of people just got tired of normal summon Alistair. Mech Knights, Shutout, Anastasis, Rogue. There's a handful of guys. Again, you're going to hear that a lot with these rogue decks. Like, the right player with a rogue deck can do good at any single event at any given time. Mech Knights, no different than these other decks. At the right time, a couple good matchups, the right player, they're going to do really well with the deck. We've seen like so many decks in the past where like some well-known player pilots it and does really good, and everyone's like, oh, that deck is so good. But in reality, a lot of time it comes down to the player, and I think that is the perfect explanation for these rogue strategies. The right player or the right player on the right day can like win an event with these, but at the same time, it is not going to be easy. PK is another one of those decks that can really take advantage of the Adventurer package, but it doesn't need to. And it's a strong, consistent follow-up. It goes first, it goes second. It does so much, I get it. But like Dragon Rider games hosting tournaments and seeing on DB high rated, I have seen like people playing the Adventurer package less in Phantom Knights, and I think part of that's because it's putting a really strong engine in a deck that was already pretty good. But Lancia and Nibiru not being the greatest hand traps this format, especially in the main deck, I think is really favorable for Phantom Knight, because even if you have like the Adventurer package in there, you can protect from Nib unless they have another hand trap. They can use the Lancia sooner, so you're gonna run out of that avenue at that point. But I just think the deck, I always kind of liked it without those. One, because I didn't have them, so I'd have to play it without them. But two, I just felt like there was better use of your deck space, and I definitely think that that's a big plus for Phantom Knights, and I think they're a really strong tier 2 deck for this format. Adventure, Flunder, Adventure is one of those decks where it's seeing a little bit more play than most of the rogue decks. It's seeing a little bit more success than those rogue decks, so it's going to be up a little higher. It's still a decently difficult deck to pilot, kind of like DD, but I've seen this deck not only, I believe it won a regional, right? Or at least it topped and got like second place or something. But in the Brookfield regional too, like right down at it, I know he got top 8, but I think it was round 8. He was at table 1, undefeated. Like, this deck is just really good, especially if you're not prepared to play it. Prank Kids, Adventurer, the deck that dominated before Despia. This deck was like starting to run towards tier 0 status at that point, and it was getting a bit out of hand. Thankfully, it's toned back now, and actually it's kind of like in that 2nd, 3rd, 4th range, like Sad, Cyberse, Eldlich, Prank Kids, Swordsoul, like all these decks were so close, and even Despia's not too far ahead of all them as far as the top 8s went. We did kind of stop tracking all the top 8s because I put a ton of time into these, and it just was kind of at that point where I didn't feel like the amount of time and effort I had to put into tracking all this down was really paying off. Whereas I'm going to start up our How to Beat series again. We'll start with Despia, and we're going to break down these top decks and talk about how to beat them that way. Because also we're kind of at that point of the format where we don't need to know the percentage of these decks topping, because we know which decks are good. We know which decks are going to have the better chance. We know which decks to expect. So I don't think we need to kind of keep seeing that same pie chart just shift a little bit here and there. And instead, we're going to work on our how to beats and actually get our strategies down for beating them. So that's kind of the direction the channel is going to go towards for the foreseeable future, along with trying to bring you guys our updated Cyber Dragon content, because that really is what built the channel in the first place. Sky Striker, Ray is Bay, the deck will never die. I'm going to put him at tier 1.5 actually. I still think the deck, not only can they play the hand traps, they got the starters, they work with Adventure, they work with DPE, the deck seems to never want to go away. And as far as like top 8s when we were tracking them for before Despia came out, and then right after, the deck was still right in that like 6th, 7th most tops. Like, the deck is just really annoying, if you will. So we kind of see our tier 1, and it's missing one deck. I think we're gonna put Swordsoul up at tier 1. I've seen some people not super sold on this, but this deck is really actually kind of crazy. Goes first, it goes second, probably better than the other tier 1 decks do, in my opinion, and it can break boards pretty easily. But on top of that, like, it's just really consistent, and I think they have a pretty good Despia matchup, and that gives them a huge leg up, because if you have a good matchup versus the best deck and you're a very good deck in your own right, it's going to make your opponent's lives a little bit harder. I'm going to put Swordsoul at tier 1. Hosting tournaments, again, in Dragon Rider games, there's a lot of people playing Swordsoul. Obviously, the tier 1 decks do see a pretty good amount of play, but I was surprised as of late, over like the last dozen tournaments I've hosted, how many people were playing Swordsoul. It's just kind of interesting to see how that develops. A deck that kind of took over for Swordsoul and then disappeared just as quick. Tenyi Adventurer. It played like one Moyi, maybe Taya, Blackout, like just a really small Swordsoul engine, but it was mostly the Tenyi's, a Synchro package, Adventurer stuff. And it was a deck that was doing really good for a while, but it's kind of faded back as more of a pure Swordsoul build has once again taken over as the better variant of the two. Branded Tri-Brigade. We got Branded Tri-Brigade up at 1.5. Seeing a little bit more success, seeing a little bit more play, and rightfully so. Like, the deck is pretty good. We already knew like what Tri Brigade could do. They kind of got power crept. They got like the bird engine hit, although bird up is still definitely playable. And then that branded, just that Mirror Jade, the follow up, I think it does give them a pretty strong extra push, if you will. Also that plan B Verde, go for the Mirror Jade. It may be a little less bricky than like Dragoon or the DPE stuff, and it just gives a different kind of follow up. Kind of like Fusion Destiny 2, it is the fusion spell that is usable from your hand. Obviously, though, the restriction is much harder on it because it is the whole turn on the only fusion monsters from the extra deck. Otherwise, we got one more deck. Virtual World, Punk World, Adventurer Virtual World, all the same. A really good tier 2 deck. I mean, I guess saying really good tier 2 deck's a bit redundant because they're all really good decks in tier 2, and out of these, it's probably actually towards the back end. But I think Virtual World is one of those decks that's just not seeing enough play once again. Kind of like Drytron, it's very good. It can see the success of the top like tier 1.5 decks. It's just not seeing as much play, so therefore that doesn't carry over and transfer into the success, and it's not seeing that. So without that representation, you're not going to get it up as high. But let me know what you guys think down below. Here's my tier list for the post Dimension Force format that we're about to head into here pretty shortly. Thank you guys for watching. Hit the subscribe button. Again, How to Beat series starting up once again.